Very much for everyone for being on time. Just a few other people wandering in from the back, and we've got three of our speakers, and Diane will come back in a second. And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had a busy stage at the time at the pavilion today already. We've had a CCUS presentation at 9 o'clock this morning. If you're interested in carbon capture, utilization, and storage, another one tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And then the following day as well in our series on CCUS. But today, right now, we're focusing on the built environment. Absolutely delighted to have the panel on our right, and I'll introduce them in due course. I'm Andrew Minson. I'm responsible for concrete and sustainable construction at the GCCA. And it's my pleasure to just kick off this event now to introduce our CEO to say a few words, Thomas Guillot. Thomas.
Thank you, Andrew. Welcome everyone, and I join Andrew to welcome everyone. I mean, this is really a pleasure to have you on the panel. I mean, it's the first time we do this exercise in COP to have a booth, more than a booth actually, to have a pavilion as we talk here. And we see a growing interest for it, so I mean, it's really great to have you here. I want to thank specifically our sponsor. I want to thank Gensler. Thank you, Diane, for being here. Thank you for the discussions. Thank you for the support. And thank you for coming on, enabling us to have this type of discussions actually across the industry and across the value chain. You all know that concrete is essential, right? This is something that GCCA has insisted on, that we carry as a message. And this message is actually gaining momentum, and we hear more and more leaders saying that on accepting the fact that concrete is essential, and that this material is really something that is needed in the development of the world in the future. We all know this discussion of the 2/3 of infrastructure yet to be built, 2/3 of the infrastructure that will be needed and that will need to exist in 2050 is yet to be built, and this is an exercise that we are really pushing now. Why it is essential? It's essential also because we are committed to the net zero journey. We have published a roadmap in 2050, and this was in 2021, sorry, and this was an essential part in changing the narrative on concrete, showing that we are part of the future, hence the concrete future pavilion. Now, to show and to demonstrate the commitment, we have published and we have launched yesterday this report on the progress. I mean, you can take a copy over there. And this demonstrates the commitment not only of GCCA, but on all the members of GCCA on that journey. But in that journey, the collaboration is essential. And in that, I mean, we are particularly happy to have people from outside the industry, outside the core cement industry, and from the value chain, because this discussion is essential to us. We need to understand how to activate, articulate, walk the talk on the journey with you guys, with people, experts that look on us from outside, like BCG, and by partners from the industry, like you on the panel today, to get these things forward and to see how we create the value, on how we push the logic on the development of this net zero journey together in the industry. So I welcome you very much to this panel. And Andrew, I give you back the floor for introduction.
Thomas, thank you so much. So without further ado, I introduce our first speaker, Diane Hoskins from Gensler. Thomas has already thanked Gensler for being a main partner on our event today. So do stick around afterwards if you want to find out more about what Gensler are doing. But my first invitation to the panelists will be just to present what you're doing on sustainability currently. So Diane.
All right, thank you, Andrew. And let's see, do I just click this to go to the next? All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Terrific to be here. It's amazing to be here at COP28 also. I don't know what the numbers will be, but it feels like there's an amazing turnout, that the world is coming together for this really important conversation along this journey that we share together. You know, you see on the signs and various interesting and inspiring slogans, and kind of walking over here today was one that really struck with me, which was unite, act, and deliver. And that really felt like it sums up kind of what we're talking about here in this pavilion and probably, excuse me, throughout this week. How we come together and unite. And again, that's what COP28 is about. That's what this forum is about. And, as was said, prior to my remarks, it's really about these ecosystems. And that is why, as the largest architecture firm in the world, we're part of this conversation with the concrete industry. Perhaps in other events, you wouldn't have necessarily had architects and consultants and others in the value chain as a key part of the conversation. But on this journey, we are partners and highly interdependent on each other. So I wanted to quickly share a bit about how we're delivering and thinking about low carbon projects. Again, hopefully drawing a little bit of a connection around the broader value chain. Let's see, here we are. This was a quote from a recent IFC report. I'm sure you guys, your report is much better than the IFC's report called Building Green, which just was launched in October. But I thought as a statement, it's such an important statement that, frankly, the world won't achieve its climate reduction goals if the emissions from the construction sector are not reduced. We are, as again shown on this diagram, and you guys have seen this in a dozen different ways, I'm sure, but however you want to slice it, the operation and the construction of buildings is about 40% of annual CO2 emissions. And again, there isn't a single sector that is larger. And so this point about the reduction of our sector being essential for the broader global reduction of carbon is a pretty fair statement to make. And even in this diagram, which, again, we see numbers being sliced a lot of different ways, but this talks about really fully half of that 40% being around the construction industry itself, which includes, of course, our materials. So when we talk about, our sector, from the design side, from the architecture and design side of things, it's about green buildings and how do we create and operate buildings that frankly may look very similar to the buildings we have today, but actually are made of different materials, low carbon concrete, that are net zero in their operations, and even operable glass and other features that are important for healthy buildings. So, as we talk about the shift to green buildings, and just to kind of bring it back a little bit to my firm, Gensler, we're the largest architecture firm in the world, and we have over 52 offices in the locations, as you see on this map. But we actually work in 100 different countries. So the impact of our work is significant. And as we now have turned our focus to green buildings, we know that it's an important part of the overall value chain conversation, both from our influence in our own industry and then our ability to partner with GCCA and other organizations, both on the client side as well as the materials production side. So when we look at, again, our own impact, we literally design over 1.5 billion square feet of new space annually. And it's through that scale that the impact is there. And that's what we see as the opportunity, 30 to 50 million metric tons of CO2 being eliminated through our own efforts and actions as we set goals and meet goals over the next decades. So our goals, and as you guys have set ambitious goals and put a roadmap together, so if we have said that by 2030 all of our buildings will be net zero, and again you saw the scale of what we're designing. And so from now till then, the other bullet points, how do we equip our organization? And that is a major part of our effort right now, literally putting in place our own product sustainability standards and other kinds of standards that we're literally rolling out with our partners in the construction industry, as well as training our own people. And this is really speaking to our GPS, which is literally rolling out as we speak. It took about 18 months to create our product sustainability guidelines, which we created in cooperation with our industry, with partners, with other architects, so that this standard is not just a Gensler standard, but that it will be used across the design sector. But it's not just, again, designers and architects. We are fueled by the fact that, when global surveys are done, there really is public outcry for decarbonization. In the recent People's Choice vote, 64% over 50 countries, 64% of people are asking for the addressing of the climate crisis to be front and center for their organizations, their communities, and their countries. And it's even beyond what people are saying to the regulatory side of it that we're seeing across so many of our countries, so many of our cities, certainly so many places we are practicing, and places where concrete is used as well. And we know that carbon regulation and disclosure will actually accelerate the need for materials suppliers to quickly move to lower carbon products. And frankly, we feel that it's important as in markets, so that it equalizes the playing field, if you will, for developers and owners when there are these kinds of standards, and again, if they are done in a sensible way. So when we talk about carbon disclosure, I like to think about the fact that this is how we are all connected really shows up as we think about the disclosure of the carbon in any part of this value chain. So let's start with the construction materials. The carbon in those materials will show up in disclosures that are around any building that material is used in. So in the buildings that we're designing, the carbon in the materials actually shows up as part of the carbon footprint, or the total carbon in that building. And now we're being asked more and more to actually put those kinds of studies together. In addition, our municipalities are starting to look at how are they going to now have visibility into the carbon associated with buildings. And again, as an architecture firm, and I know we don't want to talk about scopes 1, 2, and 3, but as an architecture firm, we see the carbon in our projects, in our concrete, in our steel, in our glass, showing up in scope 3. Similarly, the developers now are starting to realize that the carbon in the buildings that they're designing will end up showing up in their scope 3 declarations as well. And investment funds and green bonds, organizations, IFC, et cetera, as all of the kind of green financing infrastructure gets up to speed, looking at carbon is an important part of qualifying for that financing. And finally, our clients, our tenants, our occupiers, our owners of buildings, whether it's Apple Computer, whether it's Pfizer, whether it's Netflix, they are asking about the carbon in the materials in the buildings that we're designing for them. So you see from, again, from the yellow box all the way to the white box, there is visibility. I mean, it's not only, in your own internal conversations, but there is visibility for each of these entities in terms of the carbon in the concrete. So as we look at the buildings that we're designing today, and this is with today's tools and today's capabilities, we're actually having the opportunity to design even airport terminals with the kinds of ambition and goals that we all have for lowering both the operation and the carbon in the construction. And this is a great example, the Harvey Milk Terminal, which is considered the most sustainable airport in the world right now. This terminal that was designed in San Francisco, again, low carbon concrete was used, and systems, tools, approaches to reduce both operations and the embodied carbon of the materials. PNC Tower, which continues to be one of the most sustainable buildings, certainly in the United States, again, lower energy, lower water, and was LEED certified platinum as well. But we're also seeing in other countries, and I put this project in here because it is in Latin America and in Costa Rica. This is the convention center in Costa Rica, which is actually EDGE certified. And we're finding that EDGE certification is being used in the developing world even more than LEED in being able to benchmark the carbon intensity in those projects. And this is, again, EDGE certified as well as LEED certified, but a great example of what we're seeing more and more across Latin America and in the developing countries. And on the other side of the coin is resilience and the work that we all have to do in terms of finding ways to help communities in ways that are more permanent as well as ways that are temporary. And we are actually right now designing and co-creating systems that will be used across communities. Even in the developed world, we are finding that the issue of exposure to heat has to be mitigated, and again, resources being brought to bear there. So I think my final statement I just want to make is that, the encouraging piece is that, the top line here, without getting into too much of the metrics, is the path we will be on if we don't change. And the opportunity, which is in the lower two lines, is really the opportunity if we do bring to bear the kinds of changes, both in how we use the materials, and that's really important in the design conversation, as well as the materials that are available for us as you guys are focused on the roadmap. I think my encouragement would be, and maybe this is something we say for later, but that we probably need to speed up the roadmap a little bit as well. Thank you.
Diane, thank you so much, and we'll pick up some of the points that you made there. Our next speaker, Brett Ogilvie from Tonkin & Taylor, an environmental and civil consultancy. Brett's been with them for 20 years and previously was with Atkins, PhD, so Dr. Brett Ogilvie. And just before, he was just mentioning that he's been involved, from his time with Atkins, involved in a project in Uganda on hydropower. And so a whole breadth of different things that you're involved with. But delighted to have you here and giving a perspective. And hopefully you can see the choreography here. We've had the biggest architecture firm in the world in buildings, and now we're going to be talking about civil consultancy and environmental engineering as well. So Brett, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Brett Ogilvie, as introduced. Just a quick word about the company I work for, Tonkin & Taylor. We're environmental and engineering consultants based in New Zealand, also with operations in Australia. We're about 1,400 people, but we're a member of the Inogen Alliance, which is an alliance of about 80 health, safety, environmental and sustainability consulting firms from around the world. And some of my colleagues are here today. So I'm going to talk to you to give you a perspective about some procurement methods in New Zealand, which could be interesting to other parts of the world. And I'll just briefly talk about our own company's greenhouse gas journey to net zero. In 2018, we started our greenhouse gas footprinting just very quickly through. In 2021, we started retrospectively offsetting, and we've been carbon zero for 3 years now. Last year, we developed science-based reduction targets, which were approved by our board. Do I need to point this somewhere else? Maybe I'll stand over here. Try and get it away from the speaker. And we're now working towards annual targets. Now, those are that might seem very impressive to get there so quickly, but that's for professional services. Our carbon footprint's very small, but having gotten here, we can now start helping some of our clients on their journey towards carbon zero. So I'm going to talk about, as I said, in New Zealand, what the country is doing as an approach towards emissions reduction. We've got, last year, our government published our emissions reduction plan, which is a way of moving towards, is that what the problem is? Moving towards our goals as set out in the Paris Agreement. This is the emissions reduction plan. It has sectoral targets across about 10 different sectors. Transport and agriculture are bigger ones for New Zealand, especially agriculture, but building and construction is up there as well. So within the sectoral targets for building and construction, they identify concrete and cement as having a big chunk of that contribution. It's actually only about 5% of our national emissions, but still something that's worth trying to improve. So for concrete and cement, there's a number of objectives or methods that are being used or proposed or promoted by the government to manage emissions. An innovation fund, which is looking at ways of decarbonising concrete and cement. Just a plug for a couple of startups in New Zealand, Neocrete, and another one, Geo40, which is looking at alternative cementitious materials. Geo40 takes colloidal silica from geothermal wells, which is a problem because it cements up geothermal wells, and is looking at using that in concrete and reducing the carbon. Grants to increase environmental product declarations and also support to our eco label, and we've got Laura here from Eco Choice at the back here, which is our government-owned environmental eco label. A push towards prefabrication and modular design to reduce transport emissions. Building material reuse, but the big one, and that's what I want to talk a bit more about, is using the government's purchasing power to drive market change. So what the government's doing is looking to specify within projects approaches to drive down emissions, especially embedded carbon. So they've produced this procurement guide. This is the fine print at the top there. This is New Zealand government procurement. So this is a procurement guide for government agencies for reducing carbon emissions in building and construction. So it's something that all government departments are required to look at. We have a net zero government goal to drive all of our government departments to net zero. So I'm just going to use one example, which is from the New Zealand Transport Agency, where they've using this procurement approach, using a different procurement approach to the normal lowest price wins to drive these kind of outcomes, and it's the alliancing model. It's very popular in New Zealand and Australia, and we're interested to talk later about whether it's used elsewhere in the world. The way it's designed is basically the government agency procures the best team to do the job. And having procured the best team to do the job, it sits with that team to work out a target outturn cost, a cost for the project. And having agreed the target outturn cost, they use a balanced scorecard approach to figure out how they're going to achieve a number of objectives across and outcomes across the project. So you'll see this balanced scorecard here. There's 5 areas: keeping people safe, customer experience, connected journey. So this is for a state highway project. Minimising stakeholder impacts and organisational excellence. Dollars don't appear on that balanced scorecard. Those have already been agreed. So the team then works on achieving these outcomes. And you'll see on the right, in organisational excellence, we've got a key result area, which is sustainability. and in there are key performance indicators, which is include greenhouse gas reductions in the project. So having established this approach, they can work with the various partners in the team, so the constructors, the suppliers, the designers, to achieve that KPI there of greenhouse gas reduction. And this is one example from a request for proposal from the New Zealand Transport Agency for a several $100 million highway project of how they've taken the outcome that's there, and they actually write it into the document. So there's a minimum requirement to reduce carbon by 20% against a specified level, a benchmark level. So that's a minimum requirement. But then, and I'll point out the word incentivizing the alliance team to reduce up to 30% with a ceiling on 30%, and it's ceiling at 30%. And the way the financials are set up is that some of the money that's set aside is available to the alliance team if there's this target is exceeded, and the more it's exceeded by, the more monies are available to the alliance team to in their reward. And so there's a pain share and gain share model there. If they don't achieve it, then there's money is held back. If they do achieve it, then it's released to the alliance team, and it's a way of incentivizing them to think differently about how they do that. So that's just a very high level outline. Happy to sort of take questions or discuss further, and certainly with the other panelists around how this is taken up elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
Brett, thank you very much. So we've seen from the building side, from the civil engineering side, and now introduce Fernando Gonzalez from CEMEX, GCCA president, to come to the stage, come to the platform. Been CEO since 2014 of CEMEX globally. And actually, I've just got this slide here. So that we all know what that is? Well, I think we all think we know what that is. That is a fully electric ready-mix truck, the first in the Middle East. And Fernando, you were in that this morning. Yeah, brilliant. Fernando, you're not going to go and talk about that, but I just thought to bring it right up to date, Fernando was in that truck this morning. Fernando, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the selling speech. Very convenient. Let me start by making a comment on GCCA position, or one of the relevant positions. The industry as a whole, cement and concrete, is engaged, committed, and looking for ways to get to net zero by 2050. But there is one concept that GCCA started to stress, which is the need on accelerating this decarbonization process. And GCCA has called this decade, 2020 to 2030, a decade to deliver. In the last few years, we've seen how the momentum in general, the whole system is really looking for, requesting, demanding for the economy as a whole to decarbonate. And this new momentum is imposing, or is incentivizing all the ways that different industries are looking for in order to decarbonize. Referring to particularly cement and ready-mix, and now I'm going to be more directly talking on what is it that we are doing in CEMEX. By the way, CEMEX being one of the heavy construction materials company, global company, one of the largest, with presence in many countries. Let me start by saying, like a few years ago, we committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, but 2050 is still too far away. So we decided to get some short-term commitments, short-term meaning 2030. We did subscribe to the 1.5 degree scenario. We are already certified by SBTA on our roadmaps in order to get there. They are good enough to take us there. And we have, in the last 3 years, we have reduced CO2 generation per ton of cement by 12%. I don't know if that figure tells you something. To me, it's a very relevant figure, because a reduction of 12% is what it uses us to reduce in periods of 15 years. Meaning the programs that we and other companies in the industry are putting in place are companies that are decarbonizing our products much faster. So I think that part is very specific. You can see it, you can prove it. The info is public, you can check it, and so that's one thing that I want to comment. Now, how to do it? Because we one of the first things that we listen about the cement industry in particular, that it belongs to the hard to abate sector. I suppose the hard to abate term was invented like a few years ago, like 5 years ago, when there was not clarity enough on how is it that the cement industry was going to successfully transition into a carbon neutral economy. The good news is that nowadays, and I think it was already mentioned, that cement, ready-mix, heavy construction materials continue being essential to society and to economic development. The thing is that society and the economy is also demanding for those products not to generate CO2. But this transition now we know is feasible, and most of it, at least the elements that can be executed in the short term massively, and again, short term is from now to 2030, they create value. So I think the main message is, for those doubting about the future of the cement and ready-mix industry, I think nowadays we know and we can demonstrate that can be done. So I'm going to be commenting a few of the hows. How is that done? I'm going to refer to cement in particular. Cement is the main content of ready-mix, and cement, out of the three scopes, the production of cement accounts for about 80% of CO2 generation. So by talking about cement, we are getting the majority of the challenge. In the case of cement, one effort is to assure that building codes in different geographies, in different countries, are building codes, updated building codes promoting lower carbon products in the market. You might think that that's not relevant, or you might think that in all countries, this type of building codes are supposed to be promoting the use of lower CO2 products, but that is not the case. There are basically two ways to measure or to norm cements and ready-mix. It's either prescription or performance. And there are countries as relevant as, for instance, the US, in which they are still based mainly in the idea of a prescription, meaning in the US, we cannot sell cement that we can produce and has less than half of CO2 footprint when compared to the traditional type 1 Portland cement. So one very specific and relevant sector for the industry is to work on these building codes, or you name it, standards or policies related to how the lower carbon products could be promoted in the market, so construction companies can consider them in their projects. Now, a few how to say it, a few elements on how is it that we can significantly reduce CO2 generation per ton of cement. First, the part that produces most of CO2 is clinker. Clinker is a product made out of the calcination of limestone and clay. But it happens that you can reduce the amount of this clinker per ton of cement by using other natural or other industry residues with cementitious properties. Residues like slag or fly ash, or natural materials like pozzolan or like calcined clay. So you can produce cement with a much lower CO2 footprint. Another one that is very particular for our industry is that because of the characteristics of our products and production processes, we can massively use waste, municipal waste, household commercial waste as fuel. The reason why that is convenient is because fuel, this type of fuel is normally landfill if it is not recovered. If the value of that waste is not recovered, it ends up in vertederos, that's called in Spanish, in landfilling places. And those landfilling places, now we know, are the third source of methane after agriculture and oil and gas. So we can avoid that material to be landfill because we can use that waste in our production process. Another very relevant advantage is that in average that material has biomass content. In average is 50%. So it's also very relevant that we can substitute our primary fuels with biomass. So that's another source of how to reduce the generation of CO2 per ton of cement. There is a third one, and by the way, we call these conventional levers, but they've been changing so much. There is some new technologies around these traditional levers that sounds like something new. There's another element which is using the carbonated raw materials to produce clinker. That is kind of new. We all were producing clinker with the traditional formula of limestone and clay, and now it happens that we can use as much as 20% of other decarbonated materials to produce clinker, which by definition will be, again, a lower CO2 clinker. The other element is quite common to other industries, which is to use as much as possible green and renewable electricity. We use electricity and fuels. So the more we can electrify our process, and there are several projects going on in that regard, trying to electrify. Technology is still not there, but it's trying to electrify the whole process. Then we will reduce the fuels used for production, and we will increase the use of electricity that could be green and renewable. There might be other elements, part of this traditional or conventional ways to reduce CO2. But in our case, and we started measuring CO2 generation in Cemex in 1990, similar to other companies belonging to what then was called the Cement Sustainability Initiative. And our aim is to reduce almost 50% CO2 generation since then to 2030. And again, as I mentioned, the last 3 years has been very encouraging because that reduction is very material, very, very sizable. There is one additional element which I think will be the component that will allow the cement industry to get to zero, and that's carbon capture and storage or use meaning converting bad carbon into good carbon. That is perhaps the newest solution to be applied in the industry. And as far as I can see, or as far as I know, there are several projects already going on with certain characteristics. All of them in Europe, because of the the policies that prevail in the case of Europe, and the incentives that are for this type of proof of concept or first timers, on solutions to capture whatever you cannot reduce with the traditional or conventional levers. So there are a number of projects already that are gonna start operating, I think, as soon as next year. And there are much more coming. But the characteristics of these projects is that they are using almost proof technology to carbon capture. And economically, they are heavily supported by grants, by financing, by money that it's been put in place to try and to prove that the industry can successfully capture fully the CO2 that is generated. So I think what we will see is more and more of these projects, mainly Europe, to some extent in the US, and we will see little by little how the business cases for this type of final or definitive solution are going to be evolving through time. So that's what I can comment on the efforts done, at least in the company, on decarbonizing. Again, I think the message in general is very positive. Our products continue being needed, essential, the same way other industrial products are needed in society. And now, when I say now, is let's say in the last 3-4 years. Now we know that the solutions in order to get to net zero, are feasible, and they are on their way. The challenge, as we've been mentioning, is what is it that we can do to go deeper and to go faster. That's a permanent conversation in the company and in the industry. Thank you.
Fernando, thank you so much. May I now introduce Marta to you. Marta is Managing Director and Partner at BCG. She leads the sustainability practice for Iberia and South America and leads BGC globally on the green building materials and construction topics, and has been with BCG for 13 years. Marta.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. So for the ones who don't know, BCG is a global consulting firm who supports industries across the globe and every kind of industry in strategic efforts, and specifically on sustainability. We have a climate sustainability practice, and we support governments and organizations in defining their and executing their ambitions. And in the built environment, more specifically, we have been working extensively with the GCCA, the World Economic Forum, Mission Possible platform, on several topics, on green public procurements, on how to involve the full value chain in the decarbonization efforts, and last but not least, on the product standards that Fernando was mentioning are a key element here. And today, as last speaker, I would like to focus a bit on the cost and opportunities on decarbonizing the built environment. We already discussed how big are the emissions due to the built environment worldwide. We're talking about 15 gigatons of CO2, and related to buildings, 12 gigatons, so 80% of it. If we think, and as Diane was correctly saying, if we think and how to approach this, we really need to think at the full value chain. We need low carbon design. We need, of course, low carbon materials. We need to build the buildings in powering the construction phase with renewable energies. But then, and probably most important because it accounts for 50% of the emissions, we need to think at the building during the entire life cycle and making sure that that building is energy efficient and powered with renewals. And last but not least, we have to think, which is something new in the sector, at the end of life. We need to make the disassembly of the building economically feasible and attractive in order to allow for the reuse and recycle of the materials. Now, if we come to costs, and this is quite a difficult topic, but if we think at how much it's going to cost to build net zero buildings, and if we look at the different steps we saw before, we do believe that in the near future this should come at a cost of maximum 10 to 15% compared to traditional construction methods as we're used to think of it. part of this cost will be due to the materials, but and I know that here at the GCCA pavilion we think of concrete and cement and the cost of decarbonizing it that is quite high, but if you put everything in perspective, the impact of the different materials on the wall construction of the building, we're talking about approximately 5% only, if you allow me. And then, of course, we need to build, as I said, with equipment that are electrified or renewably sourced, and that will come at a cost also 5 to 10%. And then we need to increase the energy efficiencies and the renewable sources of the buildings during their lifetime, and that will come, depending on the countries, either without cost or at a 5% cost, more or less. So overall, we're talking about a cost of 10 to 15%, which is true that if we look at the different materials we use, if we look at cement specifically, this number appears much bigger. We're talking about 70 to 140%, again, depending on the technology we use to decarbonize and depending on the countries we are in. But if we look at steel and aluminum, the picture is actually much better. The extra cost of doing so is lower. And another good news is that in this sector specifically, we start seeing niche opportunities for green premium, which means this extra cost, it starts to be feasible to put it on the final client, in this case, let's think, for instance, of an automotive developer or an OEM or an aluminum uses. The reason, and I think no need for further explanations, the reason why moving towards a more sustainable built environment are clear. There is regulatory pressure, especially in Europe. There is also regulatory opportunity with subsidies and incentives, both in Europe and the US mainly, but not only. There is a risk of inaction, to be honest. So probably we are at that point that we cannot afford not to do anything. There is, as I was saying, we start seeing niche opportunities for green premium. And last but not least, and what I want to deep dive on is probably investors are also seeing the value of this. And we did this analysis on the stock price of selected building material players and construction players. The ones that you see in green are the ones that have public ambitious commitments to decarbonize, and they are considered excellent in their ESG journey. And as you can see, there is quite a big difference in how their stock price variated in the last 24 months if we look at the green ones versus the gray ones, if you allow me. So, and that difference is true both for building material players, even bigger, and for construction companies that you see here. And part has been discussed by the previous speakers, but what do we need to make this happen? I think the first point is fundamental. We need to signal this demand. We need more Gensler and we need more New Zealand, and we need it to make it both from a public and a private sector perspectives. If we think again, to do a connection, the automotive sector, 45% of the automotive OEMs in revenues have a Scope 3 commitment, which means they have signals to their steel suppliers that they are willing to buy low carbon steel. Now, it's a different story if they're willing to pay for it or not and when, but the industry sees clearly that that's the way to go. And if we look at what are the commitments in the construction sector, I have an estimate that says 7%, but to be fair, I don't see that 7%. So I think we need, as fast as possible, to reach a good 50% or a significant percentage, so that green building material producers, and in this case, since we are with the GCCA, cement and concrete producer, do not have any doubt that they need to put investments in place because there will be a market for low carbon products. Then, of course, we need public policies. Fernando mentioned it. We need to update all the product standards. It seems easy to say. It's actually extremely complicated to do, since this is highly local and highly complex, and it moves slowly. And if we want to accelerate, we need to move much faster on that. We need collaboration across the value chain. This is why I do believe in the value of these kind of panels and involving the players from design to construction. And of course, we need acceleration on technologies, especially to reduce the cost, because there is not much technology uncertainty in this case in this sector. It's a matter of making it happen at scale and bringing it to an affordable cost. And with this, Andrew, back to you.
Marta, thank you very much, and we really value the work that we've been doing with you over many years, and Cornelius, your colleagues in the audience as well. So I've got just a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. Actually, I would just briefly just go back to this. I mean, I think everyone in the audience knows. Obviously, the cement, the powder is not what we build from. We build from the concrete. So just a rule of thumb, you can divide those 75 to 140 by about 8. About 300 kilograms of cement per 2.4 ton of concrete. Divide that factor by 8. So then you get down to values of a premium of about 10 to 20% on the concrete. And I'm a building engineer by background. The concrete might be 10 to 20% of a building cost. Half of that cost will be the contractor laying the concrete and fixing the formwork, and half of it will be the material. So you bring it down, and you get to the value which I think Marta showed before, about 5% cost here. Was it? Yeah, it was on that one there, about 5%. Depending on the project, maybe 1 to 3% premium by having low carbon concrete in your building, which, you know, in the scale of that, Marta, I think you conveyed it very well. It is a premium, but actually it's manageable, isn't it? So but I digress. Diane, I've got a question for you. You've showed some fantastic projects, and you've got a commitment to 2030, and you can be altruistic, but that's not going to mainstream it. How can you develop a business case? How are you navigating the business case in a design office to deliver low carbon projects? And I'll give you a microphone even. Testing mic. Test. Yep.
Thanks, Andrew. Look, it is about, you know, the whole value chain. And for us, it starts with that client group, which was really at the top of my diagram. The demand that we see there. Actually, I would say that the majority of our clients have put some sort of goal in place publicly. Most of them are publicly traded companies and, you know, again, have huge visibility around these goals. So what we try to do is really link the facility to these goals, which often in their minds relates to what they might produce. If they're a clothing manufacturer, they're Coca-Cola, and it's about water, well, it's also about your building. It's about your facilities as well. So I guess what I would say is that our industry is the challenge, that the demand side has flipped in the last 3 or 4 years. I think COP itself has really helped to push the demand side. And then, you know, again, certain key companies end up being very influential in the space. We are focused on equipping our architects. We have over 6,500 people in our firm. Our product standards program, which I briefly touched, is pretty massive in terms of there's certain materials we are not going to be specifying on our projects, basically starting next year. And we are drawing a line in the sand. And I think, again, we've developed these standards with other architects, with advisory from our industry partners as well. And so that is, you know, an important part of more of a domino effect, even beyond, you know, the billion square feet that we designed to really impact our industry. It's like what you were saying, that the car manufacturers have signaled that this is what is necessary if you're going to work, you know, be a supplier for their cars. If you're going to be a supplier for one of our projects, you have to be able to meet these low carbon standards.
Brilliant. Diane, thank you. Brett, if I've got a question for you, just before we were discussing a little bit about your company having operations in Asia, but you've had to pull out of those, and the question I've got is that the role of public policy to create the business case. So it's not just relying on client-led projects, but there's a public policy that's enabling low carbon design. Do you want to speak about that?
Sure, thanks. Yes, I guess, and the things I touched on earlier in the presentation were setting out the New Zealand's government policy to drive towards lower carbon designs. And our experience from operating in this environment is that, in fact, I'll pick up a word that Diane said, ecosystem, and a word that Marta said earlier, collaboration, is that it does drive the collaboration across the ecosystem and extracts the value out of all the minds that are in the room. as opposed to a lowest cost model where really you just got to cut corners and don't get necessarily the same outcomes in the space such as carbon. So our experience is that the type of work under that kind of procurement model really excites our people because they get better outcomes. They get outcomes that are more aligned to mission statements such as that on the back wall there, as opposed to mission statements that are about making profit for somebody else. To the point where we've actually found our former Southeast Asian operations weren't aligned in terms of their client set and the expectations that they were driving around a number of things, including sustainability, at this point in time. So we're choosing to focus, our business case is to focus on client sets that are seeking to achieve different outcomes for the moment. But if, for example, governments through their procurement can drive the supply chain such that things like low carbon concrete and cement become normal, then I think that the environment will change in those other parts of the world, and we'll be back in there with our operating model, hopefully doing well. But it really is, that collaboration across the industry is really key.
Yeah. No, Brett, thank you. I mean, and that's a really positive message on the collaboration, and I guess I'll turn the adverse one to a positive one. The point there is that you as a company, as a civil environmental consultancy linked to this global initiative, have pulled out of some countries because the environment's not there as a value chain to be delivering low carbon projects because they're just going at lowest cost. And I'm going to turn that into a positive by saying that in this very room this afternoon, as a cement industry, we are meeting with the Canadian and the UAE governments who are sponsoring a cement breakthrough. The Breakthrough Initiative, launched at Glasgow, brings together governments who want to accelerate decarbonisation in particular sectors. Launched in Glasgow 2 years ago. Within the audience who we're interested in here, launched in Glasgow was steel. Launched last year in Egypt was buildings. And launched on Wednesday this week will be the cement breakthrough, where governments collaborating to work with industry to understand the enabling policies industry and the value chain need for the value chain and the producers, Fernando representing here all the producers of material, to be able to deliver low carbon. What enabling policies do we need? And we'll be working with those governments, and the kickoff really is this afternoon with the UAE co-chair and Canadian co-chair. So they're not on this platform here because you can't have every single one on the platform. They're a key player as well. Can I just ask you now to thank the speakers? They'll be here afterwards. We've had less time for questions than I would have liked, so do come up and nab them for a question. But if I can invite you now to thank our panelists for today. Thank you. Do you want to say a few words? If I just introduce my fellow director, Paul Adelecki, who's responsible for the stand. Paul, a few words.
It's very simple words. It's logistic words, actually. We need to clear the room. We have some drinks just on the outside. Ask your questions, do your networking there, but we need the room immediately. So thanks ever so much for coming. The next event on the pavilion is at 4 o'clock on concrete as a carbon sink. Do pick up a program, as well as our net zero progress report, which we launched 2 days ago. Thanks so much for